So last video when I did this was about Dave Gettleman's press conference on Tuesday, but on Thursday, which I guess is yesterday from now for you guys, he had two call-ins with the Joe and Evan show for WFAN and then had a call-in for the Michael Kay show for ESPN radio. So they asked some different questions, some more interesting quotes from Gettleman, and I want to go over those, and some of them went back in the past, especially the Michael Kay show. They asked some questions about the 2018 roster and, does he regret trying to go all in that year and stuff like that. There's some interesting quotes in there from Gettleman, so we'll go over them, and I'll point out some stuff that I found interesting from what he said. So hopefully you guys enjoy this video, and let's get into it.
Dave, are you solely responsible for hiring a new coach? Is it just going to be your call?
No, gosh, no.
Okay.
It's John, Mara, Steve Tisch, and myself and Kevin Abrams.
So this first one, I'm sure most of us know about. This happened the same thing with Pat Shurmur when he was hired. It was basically a four-man meeting between John Mara, Steve Tisch, Kevin Abrams, and then Gettleman himself. And that was the first year Gettleman was here, obviously, and they all decided on Pat Shurmur. So they're doing the same thing this time around as well. I don't know if one person has more say than the other. I don't know if Steve Tisch is going to step in more this time than he did last time. There's been rumors about that, so I really don't know. Gettleman does not go into specifics here, but basically he tells us the four people that are going to decide on the next head coach. Do I trust them? Not necessarily, but that's basically, if you're wondering who's picking the next coach, he answered that right there for you.
And let's be honest, and you deserve a lot of credit for this one, because that was a pick as soon as it was made. Oh, my God.
Unbelievable.
How could Dave Gettleman do this?
Right, that's all we heard.
And so far, a year in, it looks like a brilliant pick. What did you see? Because you mentioned it's more than just the physical tools. It's handling this town. We certainly know that. What did you see that convinced you, I'm not only going to take this guy, I'm taking this guy right now. I'm not going to waste time and try to get him, later in the first round or anything.
Okay. Well, very quickly, I'll take you through the process. We looked at all the quarterbacks, and right up front, Pat was most enamored with Daniel. And, we just kept investigating, and you look at Pat's history with quarterbacks, it's really kind of unique with the quarterbacks that he's coached, the young guys, and what he's gotten out of them. So, for him to be that enamored with him, I certainly, that old saying, iron sharpens iron. So it certainly made me do my homework. And
so this one annoyed me a lot, honestly, because it was basically Gettleman admitting that Pat Shurmur was enamored by Daniel Jones, and that he was basically the first one to go to Dave Gettleman and say, hey, I really like this Daniel Jones kid. Can you look into him more? And that's really how the whole thing started. Of course, Dave Gettleman probably would have seen him at the Senior Bowl anyway, but basically Pat Shurmur was the one that initiated and sparked the interest with Daniel Jones. And once again, it just doesn't, I understand that Shurmur's not a good coach. I get that. He's an average coach at best, but it still doesn't make sense to me how Shurmur's out the door and Gettleman stays when he was a big part of picking Daniel Jones. And some of you don't even think that Shurmur had any say in picking Daniel Jones, which is just flat out dumb in my opinion, because he literally just admitted it, that Pat Shurmur was a big part of it. So I said it a couple of videos ago. People wanted to go against me and say that's not the truth at all. It was all Gettleman, but it's not the truth. I mean, both guys came to an agreement here, but I didn't even know this part. Pat Shurmur was the one coming to Gettleman, telling him how much he liked Daniel Jones at first.
No doubt.
Does having past head coaching experience matter to you? Is that significant when deciding?
Well, I don't think that in my mind that's not the be-all, end-all. But obviously, if you've been a head coach before, you've sat up high, you've gotten out of the weeds, you've been up on the cloud, and you got a little different view.
So this question was, does it matter if your head coaching candidates have previous head coaching experience? And basically the answer was no. I mean, that's like the the Spark Notes version of it. But I'm happy the Giants aren't making this part of their decision making. I mean, having head coach experience in the past would definitely help for your next job. I think there's only two guys that have been NFL head coaches on this list, and they are Mike McCarthy and Josh McDaniels, of course. And Josh McDaniels was 10 years ago in Denver for only a year and a half. And, of course, Mike McCarthy was coaching the Packers for like 13 seasons, so he has a lot of experience under his belt. You have Matt Rule, who's a head coach in college, but that's different, of course. And then you have like 3 or 4 different coordinators, one special teams coach as well with Joe Judge. So there's a lot of different guys in here, and I'm happy that they're not making that a factor. I mean, if it it comes down to two candidates and they're 50-50, maybe they go with the guy with previous head coaching experience, but I don't think that's the right call because we see guys that go from coordinator to head coach, and sometimes it works out, other times it doesn't. I mean, most of the time it doesn't, but, it's very hard to hit on a good head coach. I mean, I feel like there's teams in the NFL that just rotate through different coaches every 4 or 5 years. Sometimes you find a really good one, but they shouldn't really put too much stock into whether the guy was a previous head coach or not. So I'm happy with this answer by Dave Gettleman. I'm happy the Giants are not putting too much stock into that.
And all it takes is one team who may not be you to say, you know what, we're going to give this guy an absurd amount of money, in which you could say, look, I like the player, but I can't give him that kind of money. So I think that's the concern, that you could lose him, maybe not even get a pick back, because if you spend money in free agency, you may not get the compensatory pick back. So I think that is that any kind of concern in free agency that I just laid out could happen?
Listen, anything could happen. All right? We know what our intent is, and our intent is to sign him.
So this is exactly what I was saying in the last video, if you watched the other one, how I honestly did not think Gettleman understood how the compensatory pick process worked. And basically, Evan Roberts reiterates all of that and says, well, if Leonard Williams goes to a different team, but you spend money on other free agents, then it really cancels out the the third round compensatory pick. And I don't know if Gettleman knew that, because at his press conference, he just answers, he goes, we'll get a third round comp for him, and doesn't even think about spending money elsewhere. So that's a big factor as well. I mean, I don't know. I'm praying to God that when Gettleman made this move, he was aware that the compensatory pick can change based off who you sign in the same offseason, but that's not a guy I trust, Gettleman. So, I mean, I honestly hope he is aware of that, but at the same time, as I said before, it would not shock me. So, hopefully he gets it now, obviously, because all these reporters and TV people, radio people are telling him that's how it works. But look, I'm sure he knows how it works, but based on how this trade's working and stuff like that, or looking back on the Leonard Williams trade, it's kind of confusing now. But as I've said before, Leonard Williams has all the leverage. He's going to make a lot of money this offseason, and it must be nice to be Leonard Williams right now, because he's going to make a ton this offseason.
I feel real good about our inside three. We're pretty stout inside. And Nate Solder admittedly had a tough year. He admits it, okay, and he's a pro, and he's going to work to get better. And the right tackle, Mike Remmers, had a fairly solid year. I mean, people want to say it's a disaster. It's not, but at the same time, I'm not afraid to draft over anybody.
Could you see moving Solder to the other side?
That would be for the new coach.
So there's two things here that are interesting. So the first thing he says that he feels good. Gettleman says he feels good about the inside three, talking about his offensive line. So he's talking about the two guards, Zeitler and Hernandez, that he's talking about Jalapeno, the center. And someone pointed this out to me on Twitter, and I didn't even think about that, so I credit to you guys for saying that. But basically he was saying maybe he doesn't want to kick Jalapeno while he's down, because we know he tore his Achilles just last week in the Week 17 game. So maybe that's why he said it like this. But at the same time, for some reason it seems like Gettleman has this love affair for Jalapeno, and I'll admit, I don't watch the center closely every play, but watching every snap of the Giants this year, I wasn't all that impressed with Jalapeno, and even I'm the type of person, of course, that goes back and watches the coach's film version and sees everything from the end zone angles and stuff like that, so I see what the offensive line does, and I wasn't all that impressed from Jalapeno. I mean, the guy has to work back from an Achilles tear anyway, so I don't know if it was because he didn't want to kick him while he was down, but at the same time, to say he feels really good about the inside three is a little concerning, because I feel this team needs an upgrade at center, but we'll see what their actions do in the offseason. And also, I think Evan Roberts asked him about moving Nate Solder to the right tackle position, and Gettleman did not give us an answer there. He says he's going to leave it in the hands of the next head coach, and that's a good answer. I mean, you really can't say anything, because if Gettleman said yes, but then the next head coach doesn't want to do that, then you have a contradiction, and you have a bunch of issues there. So I'm happy he left it at that. I think that's a good answer right there by Gettleman, but he really didn't say no to it either, so it's really up to the next head coach. If they draft an Andrew Thomas to play left tackle at number 4 overall, then maybe you move Solder to the right tackle and make his job a little easier, and see if you can somewhat revive his terrible contract and make him into a useful player while he finishes out that big contract.
For you, so we'll start with the firing of the head coach, Pat Shurmur. Was that your call, Dave, or did it come from above you?
That was not my call.
So you would have kept him?
It came from above.
Do you think that Shurmur did a good job?
I'm not going to go there. It's not fair for me to opine on Pat's performance right now.
So I'm going to say it up front. This is 100% me speculating, and even the Michael K show said it right after, so I mean, I got to give them some credit for this thought as well, but I was kind of on the same page with them. After hearing these interviews, I'm not sure if Dave Gettleman wanted Pat Shurmur fired. Like, if there was no John Mara or Steve Tisch on top of him, that sounded wrong, but you get what I mean. I mean, Dave Gettleman said a lot of sexual things in the press conference anyway.
We didn't know he'd come that fast, all right? We just didn't realize he'd come that fast.
But anyway, if he wasn't basically owned by those two, I don't know if he would have fired Pat Shurmur, because based off the way he sounds, I don't think he wanted him gone. You could tell he has some remorse in his voice and kind of feels bad for the guy and says, it was really had to see him up in front of the press every week and getting bashed. But, I really don't believe Gettleman wanted him fired. And maybe, this is like, once again, me speculating. I could be 100% wrong here. But we saw reports or heard reports that Steve Tisch wanted like massive changes and wanted to clean house completely. And maybe John Mara just said to him, look, you can pick one guy. It's either Gettleman or Shurmur. I'm not firing both. And then maybe he just ultimately picked Pat Shurmur. So I don't know exactly how it went, but you could tell Steve Tisch definitely had some more input this time. I mean, I feel like if it was maybe up to John Mara completely, maybe we see both guys back. And you guys know how I feel about this. I think firing one guy and keeping the other is just stupid because they came in at the same time. I think they should go out at the same time as well. So I think they just handled this whole thing poorly, but hopefully they hire a much better head coach and we can forget about all that. But yeah, I mean, it just, by the tone of his voice and the way he made it sound, I'm not 100% sold that Gettleman really wanted Pat Shurmur fired. I honestly think he wanted him to stay for one more year.
I came into it and I thought that we could do both at the same time, and I was wrong.
Was that because of your belief that Eli still had a lot left, or was it something else?
That was part of it, yes.
Did Eli have less than you thought he had?
We had to build a better team around him.
Okay. Specifically an offensive line.
I made a miscalculation. I'm being very upfront about it. And I thought that we could do both at the same time. It didn't work out that way.
Did you truly believe that this had to be rebuilt?
I thought we could do it. I thought we could do both at the same time. I said it twice. I thought we could do both at the same time, and I was wrong.
So I love that this question was asked, and this is another thing that really annoys me about him, and when people say, like, oh, you hate Gettleman for no reason. Like, no, this is another reason why. When he said at his press conference a year ago, I think it was, or maybe 2 years ago he said it as well, but he definitely said it last year. He basically said, I'm going to try to rebuild and win at the same time. And I'm saying to myself, that does not work. That's not how rebuilds work. And like I've said it on this channel, I think I've said it on Twitter as well. You can go back and document me on that. Look, you can't do that. That's not how it works. I mean, you can't try to win and rebuild in the NFL. I'm sorry, you just can't do it both ways. I understand you're somewhat on the hot seat and you don't want to lose games, but we're talking about from 2018 and 2019, not even 2020. I mean, next year's a big year for the Giants. They have to start winning, obviously. I mean, with the cap space and all that kind of stuff. But the last 2 years, they should have been rebuilding years. And, of course, Gettleman comes in here. Now, I do believe this is ownership's fault as well. I'm not going to put it all on Gettleman. I do believe ownership wanted to go all in 2018 as well. But when he took that job and he realized, like, I have to go all in, they stood by Eli Manning's side. They took a running back second overall to go all in 2018. And that roster was just not good enough. And I called it from the second it happened. I think I said back in I think it was August of 2018. I said, this is probably an 8-8 team. I don't expect to make the playoffs. If I had to guess what the Giants' record is this year, I mean, I hate to be that guy, but I think they're like an 8-8 team. Maybe they go 9-7. And you guys bashed me for it and stuff like that. And I thought this could have been a better team. But when I said 8-8, they went 5-11. They were even worse than I thought they were. Then they lost some games by some heartbreakers. I think back to that Graham Gano 61-yard field goal against the Panthers, and there were a couple other tough losses in there that year. But at the same time, that roster overall was not good enough to compete for a Super Bowl. And I blame a lot of that on ownership. I'm sure they wanted to go all in for Eli Manning one more time. But Gettleman saying he wanted to rebuild and win at the same time just did not rub me the right way back a year ago, 2 years ago, whenever it was. And now we're sitting here and he's admitting his mistakes. And once again, I'm happy he's showing some awareness that he made a mistake and he's owning up to it. That's a good thing. But as I said in the other video, if I'm in my early 20s and realizing this type of stuff that you can't do, you can't win and rebuild at the same time, why is this GM who's been in the NFL for 35 to 40 years not realizing it? I should not know this stuff that he doesn't. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And I'm not the only one. There's a lot of smart Giants fans out there, a lot of smart football fans out there that realize the same thing, that you can't win and rebuild at the same time. So that from the second he said it, it annoyed me, and now hearing him say it a year later that he regrets it and that he misjudged the whole situation is like, oh yeah, no kidding. I mean, of course this was going to happen.
And so Daniel's maturation can also be done with a defensive-minded coach.
Be bringing the right offensive guy, sure.
So this was something I was curious about. I was wondering, like, since the Giants have this 22-year-old young quarterback coming off his rookie season, would they lean more towards an offensive-minded head coach as compared to defensive-minded? And Gettleman answers it here, basically saying it doesn't matter as long as the offensive coordinator can teach him as well. And I think this bodes well for some candidates. I'm looking at the list right now who's defensive-minded here. So Don Martindale, they're talking about him and pairing up with the LSU offensive coordinator. I think his name is Joe Brady, I'm pretty sure, from LSU, the offensive coordinator. So there's that. They also have Chris Richard, who was like a defensive coordinator for the Seahawks for a while, I think for a few years, then was a secondary coach for the Cowboys. He's defensive-minded, that's all I know. And then you have... might be it for defense. I think Joe Judge, special teams, that goes both ways. So yeah, they have a couple of defensive-minded head coaches here, but at the same time, I don't want it to be like, you completely rule out one side of the ball. Some fans want a defensive-minded head coach because the last three coaches, I mean, at least since I've been alive, I don't know who was before Coughlin. That was before I was alive, obviously, probably. So, not even before I was alive, before I was a Giants fan. So the last three coaches have been offensive-minded here. So maybe some people want to go in a different direction and go defense, but basically Gettleman leaves the door open for a defensive coach, saying it doesn't matter as long as you have the right offensive coordinator in here.
Would you say that the running games that are successful in the league come from the ability to block, that the system maybe produces those running backs more than the running backs' talent themselves?
Ask me that again.
The successful running backs in this league, is it really more system than it is just their individual talents to run the football? That they throw so well that they're able to, keep 8 men out of the box on the defensive side, and they're just able to open things up for the running back more than just the singular talent running back producing those yards?
Yeah, you can make that argument. And that may be why, you can make that argument, but...
So this might have been my favorite question from Don LaGreca right here, and he's talking about something I always talked about from 2 years ago, talking about the running back position and how it relies on other people and other positions like offensive line and quarterback and scheme, talking about how if you have a good quarterback, you don't have to, there's no loaded boxes on the other side, or stacked boxes, I should say. So this makes a lot of sense, and I feel like Gettleman might have changed his stance a tiny bit, because in the past, if someone asked him this question, he'd be like, Saquon's is a special talent. There was no thinking twice about it. But then now, Gettleman's answer, maybe after talking to the analytic people and stuff like that, is saying, well, you can make the argument. That's what he says. So that's interesting because, if you asked him this last year or even 2 years ago, that was not his answer. He was standing by that pick 100%. Maybe now he realizes that he shouldn't have picked Barkley based off him not having a good offensive line here and not having an elite quarterback. I mean, in some situations, you can pick a running back very highly. I think in some cases it makes sense. Like, if you are I'm trying to think where it would make sense this year, the Detroit Lions, right? Detroit Lions, number 3 overall. Their quarterback, Matt Stafford, had a fractured back for most of the year. They did not win without him, really. And then, let's say Saquon Barkley was in this draft, right? I know they have Kerryon Johnson, who's a good running back, but let's pretend there's no Kerryon Johnson. There's a running back void in Detroit this year. That's a scenario where you can take Saquon Barkley, because Detroit doesn't have a terrific offensive line, but it's league average. I think it's good enough. You have your franchise quarterback, which the Giants did not back in 2018, I should say. In that case, you can take a Saquon Barkley, but the Giants were never in that position, in my opinion. That's been my argument the whole time. And not only the positional value, but the Giants were not the right team for Saquon Barkley. And it's because they didn't have the offensive line. They did not have the great quarterback. I mean, yes, Eli Manning could change things at the line of scrimmage and make Saquon's job easier. But defenses in 2017, 2018, 2019 were not fearing Eli Manning like they used to. It's not the same guy. I mean, some of you guys think so and think he hasn't lost anything, but people like myself and probably some defensive coordinators in the NFL probably see it my way that he wasn't the same guy. So I'm happy he brought some light to this, Don LaGreca, and asked this question. And look, it's a fair argument. There's no clear answer here. I have my stance on it. Other people share the same stance with me. I feel like we're in the minority here. And then there's people that are saying, well, it's Saquon Barkley. Who cares? Like, my argument was always like running back talent individually does not matter as much as the people around him. If you have the offensive line and the quarterback in place, it always matters more. Like, why do you think running backs that played with Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady always do well? Because they fear the quarterback. You have to. We see it now with Lamar Jackson, especially if you have a running quarterback, it helps even more. But Mark Ingram had like a career year this year. I mean, Mark Ingram was good with the Saints, and he did have Drew Brees. So, I mean, this is another great quarterback, so this guy's had it made. But he had a great year with Lamar Jackson. I mean, that's another threat you have to worry about. They had a really good offensive line for the Ravens, and Mark Ingram ended up being one of the best backs in the league this year. So it's stuff like that. When you're in a perfect situation, as long as you're an average running back, you can make it work. And I get where Don LaGreca is coming from. I'm happy he asked this question. But as I said before, it seemed like Dave Gettleman's a little more lenient on the whole stance of taking a running back that high in the draft. And obviously you can't go back now. It is what it is. But it's funny how now he's kind of changing his opinion or changing his stance as compared to what it used to be.
I don't mean to be argumentative, but really, you're saying it yourself as you're asking me.
I know, but I mean, that's a lot of money to spend on a backup quarterback, and I understand all the things that he brings to the party. He's a great guy. He's a great representative of the organization, but you don't pay a backup quarterback $26 million.
He's also a great mentor. He's teaching the kid every day. And you can't, and you cannot put a price tag on that.
So this question was a little odd and kind of stupid in a way because the hindsight's always 20/20. But the way Gettleman answered it was a little concerning. And basically, Michael Kay is saying, well, did you really, do you regret paying Eli Manning? He said $26 million. I think the answer was, or the real number is $23 million. But do you regret paying Eli Manning all that money to start 2 games in the beginning of the year before benching him for Daniel Jones? And basically, Gettleman says, like, oh, you can't put a price on a great mentor. And I'm like, well, I mean, you're not going to go out and say, I regret taking Eli Manning in, but maybe he could have said something like, we could have reevaluated it, or we could have evaluated it a different way or something like that. Like, don't tell us that you didn't mind paying a backup quarterback $23 million with all these holes on defense. I mean, if you distribute that out and paid $5 million annually to some, whether it was a good free safety or a good inside linebacker, you could have solved a lot of problems with this defense this year. And, they could have paid like a Shaq Barrett or Trey Boston or something like that, but instead they were paying Eli Manning to sit on the bench for what was supposed to be 14 games, but of course Daniel Jones had a late season injury. But, I've said this before. I mean, I think they should have released Eli Manning after 2017, I said it was. I think they should have drafted a quarterback after 2016. If we still had McAdoo, it might have been Patrick Mahomes, but that's a different story. But, actually, no, was it 2016? I don't even know what year it was now. I don't even know what class Mahomes was. I think it was 16. No, 17. Yeah, I think Mahomes was 17. But you get what I mean. So I just think they held on to Eli Manning a bit too long. I think it was 2 years overdone. I would have released him after 2017 and saved yourself some good money and probably started with a different quarterback and started over and started the whole rebuild process. And honestly, if they started the rebuild back in 2017, this team would be in a much better place right now. And that's kind of why it annoys me. And we're sitting here after 3 really bad years in a row, and the rebuild should be somewhat over by this point. They might have been, showing success and some signs of success this year. So it annoys me that they stood by a quarterback that I think didn't have it 2 years too late. But as I said, it's a stupid question. You can't go back. Hindsight's 20/20. But I can't say hindsight's 20/20 because even me, once again, a guy in his early 20s who's just a fan, shouldn't know more than Gettleman or John Mara, for that instance. I could tell that Eli Manning was declining and not the same guy. And it was not all his fault. Believe me, guys. I know Jerry Reese took away the last 5 years or so of Eli's career and did not give him the offensive line that he deserved. But at the same time, when Gettleman took over, he should have been more adamant about getting a new quarterback and saying, like, look, this whole Eli Manning thing is dumb. But I think part of the reason Gettleman even got the job was because he agreed to go all in with Eli Manning in 2018, which goes all the way back up to John Mara, and I think part of it's his fault as well. But the Giants definitely wasted 2 years with Eli Manning, and that's why it kind of annoys me. But it is what it is. You can't go back in time, so we'll live with it now. We have Daniel Jones, and hopefully brighter days are ahead. But it just delayed the rebuilding process, and that's why it annoyed me.
But getting back, you said there was no mandate about Eli. But when you looked at, and you thought you could do both, you thought that you could win and rebuild, wasn't that part of the misjudgment of Eli?
Correct.
So Gettleman doesn't really elaborate on this answer. He just simply says, correct. But Don LaGreca basically says, like, did you guys misjudge or misevaluate Eli Manning's skill set heading into the 2018 season? And basically Dave Gettleman says correct. So that's just what I was saying before, how they wasted a whole season standing by Eli Manning one more time when I think it was 1 year overdue at that point. But you know, as I said, hindsight's 20/20. Some of us saw it one way, some of us saw it the other way. People like myself noticed that in 2016, even in their good year when they went 11-5, that Eli Manning was starting to fall off a bit. And then 2017, he fell off a lot, and then people made excuses for him, saying it wasn't his fault. And look, I know it's not all Eli's fault. I'm not saying that. Once again, I know a lot of it was the left tackle, Eric Flowers. They had a terrible offensive line. Bobby Hart, John Jerry, all those guys in 2017. A lot of injuries as well. Odell, Marshall, they were out by week 5. But you can tell based off the way he was playing, Eli Manning was not the same guy that he once was in his prime, even in 2014 and 2015. So I could see the drop-off. I don't know why the front office didn't see the drop-off, and some of us saw the drop-off. Not a lot of people. There's definitely a lot of Eli Manning supporters that did not believe he dropped off at all, but, you know, we all have different opinions on that. But obviously that's the correct answer, and even Dave Gettleman admits it in this interview right here.
You made some trades last year, and then obviously you dealt Odell. The feeling might have been that the culture had to change around some of the players that you let go, and yet you still finished 4-12. So do you have any regrets making the deals, the trades that you made at the time, letting Snacks go, letting Odell go? Are you still comfortable with those moves?
Yes.
Why?
Because I'm still comfortable with those moves.
Well, the reason I asked why is because the team didn't improve at all. Matter of fact, the loss it was worse. But did you felt you were in rebuild at that particular point, so the record doesn't matter?
No, the record always matters. But we felt we needed to rebuild.
So no, Dave Gettleman does not regret any of his trades. I don't think he'd admit it either way, but it's his whole tone in this segment right here, this part of the video. He just sounds so unsure of himself, and it's not a good look. I said that, you know, the other video as well. There were some things that were not a good look in my opinion. And it's just like he's not adamant about these things. He's not like, yeah, like I definitely stand by those trades, and you know, it was time to move on and all that type of stuff. And he's just giving us like, yeah, I'm comfortable with it. And that's really the type of answer he gave. And now he doesn't have much to stand on because of the records here the last 2 years. But like at the same time, I would hope for a little better answer and a little more confidence with your answers. But I mean, this is a guy with his back against the wall. Obviously, you know, 9 wins in 2 years is not great, but at the same time, I kind of wish he was like more like, yeah, I think we got great value for these guys. It was time to move on. That was from the previous regime and gave a better answer. I mean, maybe Gettleman didn't feel like doing this interview and just gave him some half-ass answers. I don't know, but maybe I'm looking too much into it. But I think this is the last one, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this video once again. Try to think the future of what's going on here. So people want like my preferences on the head coaching candidates, and the Giants, I went back and looked when they hired McAdoo and Pat Shurmur. It was like Shurmur was like the end of January and McAdoo was the middle of January. So we might get a decision within the month. Maybe, I really don't know. They might take their time with this one, but I'm going to give you guys my list. You know, whenever I'm done doing the research, I've researched a lot of these candidates so far. I'll admit, I'm not too familiar with Joe Judge right now. Eric Bieniemy, I still need to look into more. But I have opinions on the other guys so far, so I just want to make sure I put a list out there. I don't want to feed you guys some nonsense. I want to make sure I actually do my research first. Like, believe me, I could make a lot of videos and just keep feeding them out there to you guys, but at the same time, I want them to be accurate and, you know, all that type of stuff. Like, I don't want to put out some inaccurate nonsense just to get views and clicks. That just does not doesn't sit right with me. So that's not the type of person I am, and I want to do the research and hopefully get this right for you guys. So yeah, just bear with me. I'll do some videos about college prospects coming up in the next couple months as well. That should be fun. The whole Isaiah Simmons and Andrew Thomas debate, the cornerback from Ohio State as well as putting his name in there. So yeah, we'll see what happens in there. Hopefully you guys enjoy the upcoming videos. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you made it to the end, I appreciate it. This video has been mad long, so I apologize, but if you made it to the end, thank you very much, and I'll talk to you next time.